My name is Sohrab, and I'm in the business of restaurants, nightclubs, bars, quick service restaurants. And my job is to create an environment where people can come, eat, and drink. Furthermore, I make sure that those people have a great time when they're eating and drinking. Sometimes, when I'm in the mood, I also go and talk to them. It's a fun job. It's, it works well for me. But like any other middle class family, I was actually groomed to be an employee. And that's what I became. So I joined a corporate organization. It was, well, I joined the Taj Group of Hotels in the field of hospitality, and I spent 2 years. But within 2 years, I realized that this job was not really set for me. I found myself stagnating and not growing mentally. I knew that for me, especially, for some people, of course, it's a great field, but for me, especially, it was, I knew that I had limited growth options. So I have this business intuitiveness from the beginning. So that's when I figured that I should be looking at the entrepreneurship. It was very scary because most of us, when we step into the world of entrepreneurship, we are always bound by this monthly pay that we get monthly pay that we get every month, and that is a big hindrance in entrepreneurship because when you step, and it's also one of the most difficult steps to take from a corporate job, and that shift from a corporate job to actually get into entrepreneurship. Uh, I feel that my journey has been a little simple because I come from probably one of the few distinguished government services, army, right? So I think army has given me a fantastic resume, and army gave me abundance of everything, whether it was traveling, work, singing, music, dancing, bands. There's nothing better than the army, right? You talk about adventure sports, diving, anything and everything, more sophisticated sports, riding, golf, sailing, everything is available. So I think my journey was made pretty simple, and it was not very difficult for me to step into this world. But yes, why people find it difficult is because in the corporate world, you live a very, let's say, protected life. It's like when you move into entrepreneurship, you've got to really snip off the umbilical cords and come out into the open. It's not easy. It's a tough task because where everybody's there with you in the corporate world, in the world of entrepreneurship, you're all alone, especially when you start your journey. And that is why many of the people fail because that in the corporate world, in the world of entrepreneurship, you've got to be really mentally stable. You've got to be mentally very strong. That's half the battle. As soon as you enter into entrepreneurship and you're mentally strong, you're the winner. It's pretty easy. So I had many difficulties, and I like to share some of the learnings that I've had in my journey. So I've been really influenced. I did many restaurants, but unfortunately, I realized that I was not being able to. The golden word, which everybody, all private equity and everybody's using, is scaling up. I wasn't able to scale up. So I was wondering, where am I going wrong? What's the reason that some of the people are able to scale up and I'm not able to scale up? I did great award-winning restaurants. They were great. But that's where it was. And after some time, like any other business you do, it shut down. It ran for a good 5 years, maybe some ran for 7 years, 10 years, but that was the end of it. So what were the basis of scaling up? I said, forget what everybody is saying. Let's look at my roots and let's look at the culture that we come from. So I looked at the Indian Army, and I'd like to associate this with not the Indian Army, actually the British Army, right? So the number one thing I realize in business is that business in India, if you want to scale up, is done through communities, which is really important, right? So let's look at it. I'll give you an example of the British Army. There was a time when British Army comprised of many Indians. But at that point of time, if you realize the Indians were not ready to actually die. They did not have the patriotic approach that they have now. So what's the reason? What did the British do? What the British did was they created, especially of the fighting arm, I'm not saying for everything, but for the fighting arm, they created a regiment. In the regiment, they made sure that there's only one particular community that entered that regiment. For example, even if you look now, so you've got the Sikhs, which is the Sikh regiment, you've got the Grenadiers, which are the Jats, you've got Assam rifles, you've got Rajputana rifles, which comprised of the Rajputs. Then they went one step further. They said, let's give each community a war cry. That further strengthened the belief in the community. Post the war cry, they even gave them flags, right? Everybody had their own community flag. They went on and gave them uniforms, which then some of the fighting arms like the Gurkhas, they also gave them, kukris which they could carry. So now all of a sudden what happened? All of a sudden, India was left behind, but what was working was the community. So now people were all of a sudden they were highly motivated and they were ready to die for the community. So that's what changes. For me, I've really been inspired by all of this, and that's exactly what I've done in my business. So I've reached out to people, and I realized that to scale up, it's important to be a part of the community. Now, being a part of the community is not very difficult. You've got to just go and be there. You've got to do some study work. You've got to understand. But like any other business, just being a part of the community is not enough. You also have to nourish the relationship, because in India, everybody is sensitive, right? So one wrong move and you can be ostracized completely, and then it's very difficult to get back into that community. So my number one learning in scaling up has been community. If you look at the last business that I've done, which of course I won't name the business, but so the community, the way we reach out to the community is by certain glass bottles, and each glass bottle is kind of representative of that particular state or the city. So scaling up was one. Then I also realized that, the kind of people that are working for me, they're not highly motivated. When I look at the Indian Army, the soldiers are ready to die. What is it that kind of motivates them? And why is it that I'm not being able to motivate people? So again, I said, listen, I went to many so-called industry stalwarts, and they said, listen, the best way is a man will only work X, okay? X, he'll do an X amount of work. If you want him to do X plus Y, then what you have to do is give him money, which is called incentives, right? I'm a firm believer that incentive is actually not required at all. And anybody who's working for incentive is actually doing you a disservice, because the work should be done from the heart and soul. And that is how a person gets motivated, not by incentives. The Western culture may be different, and in the West it's easy, maybe money motivates them. But I realized when I went down into the roots, I'll give you a simple example. We all go and we travel, and most of us say, look, yeah, China is 50 years ahead of India. America is 70 years ahead of India. But there is one thing that we have, and I can proudly say that we as Indians are 1,000 years ahead of all the countries. What we have is family, right? We have a family, we have emotions, and that's something that I believe really gives us a foothold. So and what is priority for us? For me, our families have always been priority, more than me. I don't want the money, but if somebody really looks after my family, I'm highly motivated. So the most important thing for us is to look after families. Again, you look at the example of the Indian Army. The families are very well looked after. You know, the kind of experiences, anybody who has an army background or an Air Force background, the kind of things he's exposed to, not many people get the opportunity, right? So again, that's a big learning. So in my companies, what I've started doing is we are really a family-focused company for the employees. And when we've done that, we've seen incentives are not there in our organization. And it works really well because everybody is highly motivated. And so things have worked out fine. Well, this is a basic thing that I learned in business is you've got to be good in what you do. You can't be a mediocre. And practice makes perfect. Without that, nothing is possible. For me, one of the most important things is that after my scaling up, after my motivation, what happened was that, people were still leaving the organization. I was wondering why, what is the reason? And I dug deep. And I realized that it's essential to create an environment which does not promote favoritism. It's all but common. It's important to create an environment that's impartial, okay? How do you do that? It's extremely difficult. For me, it was the hardest thing to do. You know, in life, there will be a situation when you as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, as the boss, you'll have to promote one person over another person. And that person will take it. But he will not take it. He will take it only if you've promoted somebody on the basis of merit. If you've not promoted anybody on the basis of merit, he's not going to take it. And chances are your company is not going to be successful. So you've got to get people to do work with their heart and soul. When you look at musicians, I mean, I'm just giving an example of a musician, say a piano player. Now, if you get 5 different piano players and they all play the piano, it's just a piece you can read, and then everybody can play the same piece, and yet you'll find that there are certain people who are able to hit the keyboard differently. Let's use the word piano, the piano differently. They've got that feel. They've got the touch sensitiveness. They add their own creativity into that, and that's what really defines you. So business cannot be just run on systems and processes. It cannot be just run by what the West thinks, the way business is run. There are many things to it, and in India, we should use the Indianness that we have to create a successful business. Your personality should be reflected in that business, right? A last point that I feel, which is very important, is look, you can't become obsolete. For example, if you look at the companies, you look at the stock market, and you look at the companies which were there in the 90s. Today, when you look at, forget today, in fact, if you look at 2003, 2004, those companies were absolutely obsolete. So what's happening? Nothing is happening, but things are changing at a very, very rapid pace. As entrepreneurs, you've got to be ready for that change. You know the drivers of change are very simple today. You've got artificial intelligence, you've got augmented reality, you've got smart cities. What else is happening? 5G, it's about to come, right? So big data, I think that's become really big. All these things are going to become drivers of change. So if you want to be relevant to business, and what I'm trying as an individual, especially in my businesses, is to be relevant to these times. Some people could stay relevant because of this, but there's another field that you need in today's times, a field that machines can't do, what algorithms can't do. For example, if it's a self-driven car, the self-driven car is based on algorithms, but it cannot calculate whether a human being is able to cross the road or not, right? So businesses that require creativity, businesses that require social skills, negotiations, teaching skills are going to become big. So to stay relevant, these are some of the points that we must incorporate in the business, and it's essential to do so. I would also like, so these, remember, in my companies, what I'm trying to develop is the digital first mindset. What happened is, if you're able to, because that's going to be the future, and if you're able to develop the digital first mindset, it'll slowly permeate into the organization. From the organization, it'll permeate into all your systems and processes that you've kind of laid out. So it's essential to lead. But the most important thing in business and in entrepreneurship in India is to ensure that you've got to learn from your roots, your customs, traditions, and incorporate that. Don't just follow the West wildly. I read many magazines, and I found out that most of them are not really relevant for doing business in India. So I think entrepreneurship is a great step. I've learned a lot here. There was a time when when my work was actually, when my life used to fit into my work. All of a sudden, post-entrepreneurship, I've got a life here, and my work is actually fitting into my life, and I really love that, right? So it's a great opportunity. I think this is one area where you can control your own destiny. You can control everything. You're not dependent on a third person. So I would highly encourage all of you, if you've not already stepped into the world of entrepreneurship, to actually go ahead and try it. Remember, if we do it, we'll be in a position where we'll be able to build lives and not live one. Thank you. Yeah.